Welcome to the History in 60 podcast, a companion series to AMI's History in 60, hosted by John Loeppky, exploring powerful moments in Canada's disability history. Here in the podcast, we take a deeper dive through conversations with guests who are shaping disability culture and history today.
Comedy has always been used to provide a reflection for society, sometimes to make us laugh, and sometimes to make us deeply uncomfortable. When it comes to disability, comedy has a complicated past. For generations, disabled people have often been the butt of the joke, rather than taking the microphone and telling our own funny stories in our own hilarious ways. Today, disabled comedians are flipping that script, using humor as advocacy for social change and as a way to reclaim our own narratives. Our guest is Yousef Kadoura, an actor and writer who uses humor and drama to explore identity, lived experience, and the realities of navigating the world as a disabled person. Thanks so much for joining us on the companion podcast for History in 60. Thanks for joining me, Yousef. We'll start with a little bit of integrated described videos. So if you could tell me a little bit about the space that you're in.
I am sitting in my home office with some sound batting and a lamp behind me. I'm wearing headphones. I have round black glasses, long black hair pulled into a bun, little mustache, stubbly face, and I'm wearing a blue t-shirt.
Thank you. And I'm here in our podcast studio here in Saskatoon, Saskatchewan, with the History in 60 logo sort of peeking out behind me in a blue shirt, similarly bearded. I'm going to start, Yousef, with the question that I'm sure you've been asked a billion times, but allow me to be a billion and one. How did you get involved with performing, and when did you orient yourself towards these sorts of projects that touch on the realities, the sometimes funny realities of disability community?
I got involved in the arts at a pretty young age as a teenager, merely by happenstance and trying to make friends and things like that. I wasn't very directed towards it until my final year of high school when I went to, in Ontario, we have a town called Stratford, much like in the UK, where we have a great big theatre festival every year, the Stratford Festival. So I went there, I saw some shows. I went, oh my God, can I do that? My teachers told me if you hand in your work on time, you can maybe do that. At which point I went to the National Theatre School in Montreal, because Montreal was the only city in Canada I could afford to live in at the time. So I moved from Ottawa to Montreal, studied there in a really kind of traditional theatrical environment, focused mostly on stage work, not really much in the realm of comedy or video, film, television, anything like that at all. Really highly theater focused and specialized. And partly during my final year there, I started inquiring about what existed in the disability arts world. And is there anything like that really happening, or am I the only amputee doing this anywhere? Which, thank God, I wasn't. And thank God there was also some really cool stuff happening at the time. Once again, in Ottawa, there was a kind of symposium thing happening called the Republic of Inclusion, which brought together a whole bunch of disabled artists from across the country, the UK, some parts of the US, I think, to discuss and sort of make these connections. So basically, right upon graduating from my theater program, I was introduced to this amazing world of disability arts, moved to Toronto, and started plying my trade, as it were, selling coffee outside of that when nobody wanted to hire me, but mostly trying to work across theater, film, television, and always looking for things within community, within disability arts. I started off working at a art gallery, in fact, called Tangled Art Plus Disability. And from there, I started making connections with different people in the theater world, in the film and television world. And a few years ago, was lucky enough to finally get to experience it in the medium of film, or television in this case, with the Squeaky Wheel, which is also my favorite online magazine of all time. And yeah, that's kind of a long-winded way of saying I kind of looked for things and was lucky enough to find them.
You mentioned going to the National Theatre School. If my research is correct, you're part of Eraser, published by Playwrights Canada Press. You've worked on a podcast. How have you seen disability history play out in those spaces? Because I did a MFA, well, technically a multidisciplinary MFA, but anyway, the long and the short of that is that part of it was talking about like disability art on the prairies. And it struck me when I was doing that work that a lot of it is you either really have to dig or, you, the researcher, were part of it. So how did disability history play out in those spaces for you?
It was different in every single space that I went into. At National Theatre School, I was lucky enough to have an administrator there and a couple coaches in particular who were open to the conversations of things like, let's adapt this work so that way your body can do it. And sort of the conversations of what do you need? At the same time, there's still like the institutional ableism and things that exist. So for me in that space at that time, it really felt like being the only person there doing it because I was the only physically disabled person at the National Theatre School at that time. There were people there before me and there were people after me as well. But in my experience, it was kind of solo. And then moving out into the broader worlds in the late 2010s and like early parts of the pandemic, I saw this more so. But there was sort of this wave of let's make our spaces accessible. Let's create some forums that make art easier to access for the performers, not just for our audience members. And that was only possible because of all the work done by the people before us, going back to the 70s, even as far back as like the 30s in some cases, and all those people who made the space before us. So it was cool kind of seeing that happen in spaces in Toronto, in spaces in Quebec and Montreal, particularly, and the sort of like embracing of it that started to happen over the last few years. Again, this isn't everyone's experience, but I've noticed a bit of a drop off in that kind of accessibility and that kind of thinking about spaces, mostly around budgetary constraints, right? And about people's worries about cost and the overarching financial instability that people feel. So it kind of, for me, is a wave, this kind of up and down that happens. And it's amazing because like those spaces exist, but they take work and advocacy and kind of looking back to the people who came before and going, what did you do? Now, can we improve upon this? Or can I remind people what you did in the past that worked so well?
As somebody who's worked in disability art and culture for a long time, how do you see the Squeaky Wheel Canada? How do you see that fitting into the context of other disability art and culture that we see? Because I think it can be so easy when we think of disability art and culture to think really heavily towards theater, a little bit less heavy, but quite heavy towards dance, which we also had another episode on. But and some of the arts that are maybe less highbrow are thought of less in that sort of disability cultural space.
I think like people are afraid to approach lowbrow humor when it's around disabled people because so many times it's couched in oppression or putting people down. But it's not when we're the ones in charge of it, right? When we're the ones wielding that power and that comedy. Comedy is a way in which people connect. It's something that releases so much tension. And we all have so much tension right now. And the Squeaky Wheel is really special because it's not just the disabled people making the jokes. It's the disabled people creating the container that it all takes place in, because you have people working across every single level of the production who are disabled. You have people administratively, you have the actors, the writers, the directors, and we get stronger, fiercer, funnier, blacker, you could say, comedy by letting those people share their experiences. One of my favorite comedians is Sacha Baron Cohen, and his style is couched in bouffant. It's a little bit cruel, it's a little bit nasty, it's a little bit dirty, but it works because it touches on certain truths and realities and holding up a mirror to people who would put you down. And the Squeaky Wheel does that so well because it holds up a mirror for people. And it's also for disabled people and disabled community, right? It can bring other people in, but first and foremost, the people who need the laugh and the people who benefit from the most from its existence are a disabled community. My wife is disabled, and so is her mother, my mother-in-law. It brought me so much joy when my mother-in-law pointed out like that she had never seen anything like that as a disabled woman growing up. And to be able to bring that to people and let them see themselves on film is so special. And to see them doing it in something that you would think is taboo. Oh, we can't joke about that. Well, yes, we can, and we can make it ridiculously funny.
How do you think we can draw or find the line between people laughing with disabled people rather than at disabled people? I mean, in the episode that this is a companion to, we look at things like vaudeville and freak shows where disabled folks were being shown as villains in popular media and being sort of the butt of the joke. And then you have this more recent era of disabled comedians who are reclaiming in some way that humor and yet making it broader so that, you know, non-disabled people can also feel included in the experience. But how do you think we can draw that line between where it lands and where it's just, you know, even coming from a disabled comedian, it's not moving things forward?
I'm a big fan of reclaiming the freak show as a form, as a way of life. I mean, those were originally like traveling groups of people in community in some cases, right? But at the same time, like I remember my first introduction to Buffon was at National Theatre School, and one of the exercises that is taught always in Buffon is one where you crip up. So classmates of mine started like hiding their arms and like putting tooth black on and stuff like that to disable their bodies. And I remember getting pretty pissed off and having to stand up and go like, wait a minute, like this isn't cool, and having to have a whole conversation around it at the time. But that teacher in particular listened, wanted to talk more about it, and was very positive and into learning more. And I also wanted to learn more of the why and the impetus behind it. And the impetus itself isn't necessarily bad because it's about the original myth of the Buffon, as it were that they were people who lived on the fringes of society, that they were the freaks living out in the swamp who would come to town and do a show making fun of the king and queen. And because of their disability in their body, were able to escape at the end of it and go back to the swamp and then come back again to do it another year. So it's this very prickly and kind of tricky thing of like, no, your able-bodied performers should not be cripping up to do an exercise, but understanding why this exercise exists and understanding the myth from the beginning of this group of disabled people being able to make fun of the highest level of power. And so I think that, like, to cap it off, we need that kind of humor, but led and done by disabled folks. It's not to say that other people can't take part or be involved, but at the end of the day, your experience is the best one to work within.
How do you think disability-led comedy, whatever stage form it takes, can help us sort of catalog, highlight, enshrine Canadian disability history?
Comedy is memorable. We want these politics and these ideas to stay alive in the zeitgeist. Then we need the people who have the ideas to be remembered. And you know, the funnier they are, kind of the easier it is for them to stay in people's memory, on one hand. On the other hand, at the end of the day, comedy is entertainment. It's a high quality entertainment. So why shouldn't we be represented on the same level as able-bodied comedians? It's about encapsulating the entirety of the form. And in order to get the entirety of the form and to do comedy itself justice, you need to include disabled people. You need to include Black people. You need to include queer people. You need to include straight white guys. Like, everyone needs to be a part of it, or else it's not a true representation of what Canadian comedy is.
You mentioned there making sure that these spaces are inclusive. One of the things that we bump into in working on the show, and basically anything that covers disability history, especially Canadian disability history, is how white it can tend to be. I'm curious if you would be open to speaking to, from your perspective, how and easy for me to ask as a white disabled guy on this side of the camera, but wondering if you could talk me through a little bit about how you think we can use not just comedy, but the tools we have as performers to disrupt the presumed whiteness of Canadian disability history.
First off, in order to correct that and for us to have a truly representative society, we need the resources to be available to everyone. That's where it begins at the end of the day. And we need to make our spaces, every space, accessible to these people, not just certain neighborhoods or certain areas. And disability justice encapsulates everyone, right? We can't pick and choose who gets what or whose case is more important.
We don't need to do the oppression Paralympics.
Exactly. It's a stupid game, and everyone loses. That being said, we need to be looking to the communities who are experiencing the most disruption at the same time. There are more Palestinian children who are amputees than any other group in the world right now in a very short period of time. How do we create space for those people as they grow up, for those children? As they grow up, as they come to places like Canada, because their contributions are valuable and their contributions are important. Older people living in Canada who acquire disability later in life, let's say, how often do we just kind of leave them there and go, well, they're old, they're not really going to figure it out. Like, you can't teach an old dog new tricks.
And often they don't identify as disabled.
Exactly. We still need to make space for them and give them the resources and the opportunity to be a part of community and to learn. It's complicated. It's uncomfortable in some ways to reach out to those communities, but it's important and necessary too. Otherwise, we're just going to further insulate ourselves and we're going to shrink and get smaller, and we aren't going to have the collective voice, the kind that changes government opinion, that gets you resources, that gets you funding, that lets you live a life that allows you to entirely and wholly flourish as a disabled person.
I think of that line from I believe it's a Canada Council report from like 15 years ago that says disability culture is a frontline issue for the 21st century. Mm-hmm. And just how, culture and history go hand in hand in this space. When you're telling these stories, whether it's through the lens of comedy or not, funny to use this word on a disability-focused podcast, but like, who are your inspirations, or who are the folks that you take solace in community in when you're building up these things that we know have a history dating back, to your point, to like thinking about like David Freeman's Creeps and dating even further back, right?
I love people like Alex Bulmer, who is a blind Canadian playwright and actor. I met her post my time at National Theatre School at the Republic of Inclusion. There was the quality and beauty of her work that blew me away and made me go, oh, it's not just about identity. It is so much bigger and wider than that. I'm not just doing this because I'm disabled. I'm doing this because it's important and it's beautiful. She is like a repository of knowledge of the people who came before too, especially. But really, like, she is my biggest kind of like example of how to be as a disabled artist.
If a disabled artist came up to you, just for argument's sake, they are like a first year National Theatre School type person, and they came to you and said, what should I know about disability history? What would you say to them these years on?
I've had that conversation a couple of times. I can think of two guys who kind of come through National Theatre School specifically since my time there. Really, I would tell them to look into the history of the freak show, particularly. Look into the origins of a time when the economy is incredibly badly damaged, kind of like now, or like not looking so hot, let's say. I don't want to like spread doom and gloom. But things are tough, I think, especially for disabled people financially. I would say to look back to that particularly. But at the end of the day, just to talk to people and to start reading and finding their own path through it and their own sort of form of understanding, because I think that's how you find the most interesting tidbits of information. I would probably send them to a few different archives or things to take a look at. I know that I believe TMU has a really good archive based on their disability and performance program, as well as the archives at the National Theatre School in their library, which is open to the public, or the Tangled Art Plus Disability archives, where they have artists, have programmed artists from across the country. That's where I would send somebody who wants to start diving into that history. But if they're just looking it up for fun and just trying to like get a grasp and figure things out, the origins of the freak show is a great place to begin.
In the TV episode that accompanies this, we spoke to Wesley McGee Saxton, another one of your cast members, who talked about one of their favorite experiences as part of the show. Do you have a favorite memory from the show? And not to intellectualize moments from a comedy show, it doesn't always have to be so deep, but what about that moment is memorable for you when it comes to sort of putting that out into the world?
My favorite moment from the show was one with Wes, and that was a sketch about the Paralympics, or rather casting people for a Paralympics ad. And I was playing the director and Wes was my assistant. And it was just so viciously funny, and that kind of humor that we were talking about before of like, oh, you can really only say this if you're disabled. But to play the director who I have met a few times in my life, who just kind of wants to exercise their power and be the biggest force in the room, and really will say whatever comes to their mind, no matter how stupid or offensive it may be. That was probably my favorite one, where we're trying to cast this role, and the best moment was probably jumping across the table as we're trying to find everyone who fits. You know, like the conservative mind will come up with these ideas, like they think that like people on the left are trying to cast people by going like, we need them to check as many boxes as we possibly can, right? They need to be disabled like 3 different ways. They need to be a person of color. Even better if they can be like some kind of gay. That would be great, and that kind of energy. And in the casting of it, it was a moment of the scene where I look over and I see Wes has a rainbow notebook. And I leap across the table and I go, are you gay? And cast Wes and that was just, it's nice being able to play characters who are not at all funny in real life, but being able to poke at them and mock them and do that kind of, it was the most bouffant scene, I think, out of all of them that we got to do. And that's what brought me joy. And being able to do it with Wes too, who's just such a good sport and so into like the physical comedy of it all, of the leaping across the table and the things that like you can't really say, but it's really funny.
And you mentioned sort of like, because I've met that, without naming names, I've met that kind of ethos before. And, you know, it's also a challenge for a history program like ours of how to make sure that a program is inclusive without sort of unintentionally putting all of one marginalized group into one episode, right? Because we've seen that happen a lot, right? In other realms where it's like, and now we'll cut to the disability corner and we won't talk to them again for another 4 years.
I was cast as that character once. I once got cast as a character who was pansexual disabled person because I am Arab. The director, and who was also the playwright, was like, great, we're going to put a whole monologue about your ethnic identity in there as well. And I'm like, this is a lot to juggle.
How do you see comedy filtering into your career now? Because unless I'm wrong, you don't sort of characterize yourself as a stand-up comedian by trade or anything like that. So
no, I characterize myself as an actor and a writer first and foremost. But that being said, like I have some certain sensibilities around that kind of stuff. And throughout my entire life, like comedy is a part of my disability. When people, if you meet me at a party and you come up to me and you go, how did you lose your leg? I will always give you I will feed you some because it brings me joy. I find it funny, and it's a bit of an acting exercise too, I guess you could say. But like I had a really drunk girl come to me at a party one time. I just have to say, what happened to your leg? I'm like, oh my God. And I said, it's okay. I have dysmembrophilia. You have what? I have dysmembrophilia. It's this rare condition where limbs can just randomly fall off. My leg fell off when I was 6. Honestly, my finger, my hand, my head, those could go at any time. They just haven't yet.
I've had that. I was in an American airport. I can't quite remember which one. And somebody asked me if I rode a polar bear to school. And I said, no, the bastard isn't wheelchair accessible.
See, like we have so many of these just loaded and ready to go because like you need to give people a little bit of levity so they can come down to your level sometimes because they are just so serious, like so incredibly serious. And it's just starting from way too high of a point to be able to have a heart to heart or like a real conversation with somebody if that's what you want to do. And that happens in the work all the time, right? You're working with somebody new and they're afraid to give direction because they don't want to cause injury or something like that. And you just kind of have to take it in stride, pun intended.
I was going to say they don't want to ask you to hop over somewhere.
Exactly. Or like, can you go up these stairs? And I'm like, well, I walked into the studio, which is on the 3rd floor. So you tell me. But like, if I want to get like truthful responses from people, I need to get a little bit of that repartee going. And especially, in theater, not a play can't entirely be doom and gloom. So as a creator, I try and find those moments of levity and those moments of breath. Honestly, I think I just don't write comedy all the time because I find it to be the more difficult one to write versus drama.
Right.
Like I've written a few sketches or some joke or like some comedic clown or buffon turns and stuff before, and they're really fun. But it's just a lot more work to make things funny sometimes. I think that's also why I tend to sit in drama, but also because drama needs comedy to live. And also comedy does need drama. Like you as the character have to take it seriously or else it's not funny. If I tell you a joke and I'm already laughing, it's just for me.
I think that's a great place to end, Yousef. I'll just end with, if people want to find out more about you, about your work, whether it's on stage, on screen, elsewhere, where can they find you and what can they expect?
So I'm not really on social media to any degree because my mental health does much better when I'm not. However, I do have a website at www.yousefkadoura.com. I'm also a part of a theater company located in Toronto called the Other Hearts Collective. You can learn about upcoming shows and performances of ours by following us on Instagram at wemake.otherhearts or via our website at www.otherhearts.ca. That's just OTHERHEARTS. I will also be in a new film coming out this year, which I think I can talk about. The Judy Heumann story, amazing disability rights activist in the 70s. That film will be coming out sometime this year. So keep your eyes peeled for it because even if you're not there to see me, the entire cast and the film itself is just amazing. And also good answer to your question that you asked me earlier of where would I direct disabled youth to go to look up their history. Judy Heumann is awesome. So check out that film if you can when it comes out.
Thank you for all of that, Yousef.
Thank you so much for this, John. It's been a really real pleasure, and I feel like I've learned a fair bit too. It's really awesome.
Thank you for tuning in to the companion podcast for AMI's History in 60. Be sure to watch History in 60 on AMI TV and online at AMI+. Join us next time as we continue exploring disability history and culture in Canada. If you enjoyed today's episode, please consider subscribing, downloading, and sharing it with someone who might learn from these stories. Every listen and view helps amplify disability history and the voices shaping change today.